My parents threw me out of my own birthday party in front of 50 guests. My mother pointed at the door and said, "If you're so unhappy here, then leave." My father didn't defend me. My younger brother laughed. Everyone watched. I thought that was the worst moment of my life. Then a woman sitting 3 tables away dropped her wine glass, stood up, and whispered a nickname nobody had called me in over 20 years. A nickname I didn't even remember until that second. And that was the moment everything my parents had hidden began to fall apart. Stick with me. My name is Brinley Rhodes, and for as long as I could remember, I felt like I never truly belonged in my family. My parents, Warren and Patricia Rhodes, always treated my younger brother Dylan like he was the center of the world. He got praise for everything he did. I got criticism no matter how hard I tried. Every birthday, holiday, and family gathering reminded me that I came second. When I turned 27, my mother organized a large birthday party at our house. Friends, relatives, neighbors, and business associates filled the room. At first, I hoped things would be different. They weren't. Throughout the evening, Patricia made jokes at my expense. Dylan joined in, making everyone laugh. My father stayed silent as usual. After years of holding my feelings inside, I finally spoke up. I told my mother I was tired of being treated like I didn't matter. I told her I deserved the same love and respect Dylan always received. The room became completely silent. My mother's face turned red with anger. Then she pointed at the front door. "If you're so unhappy here, then leave," she said. I stared at her in shock. Nobody defended me. Not my father. Not my brother. Not a single guest. Fighting back tears, I grabbed my purse and started walking toward the exit. Before I reached the door, I heard the sound of glass shattering behind me. A woman at another table had dropped her wine glass. She stood up, staring directly at me. Her eyes filled with tears. "B," she whispered. The name hit me like a sudden wave. I didn't understand why, but something about it felt familiar. The woman began crying. Several people sitting with her stood up in shock. An elderly man looked at me and quietly said, "It can't be." The entire party descended into confusion. The strangers kept staring at me as if they had seen a ghost. Then one of them said something that changed everything. They claimed they knew exactly who I was. And suddenly, I had questions I never imagined asking. I barely slept that night. The faces of those strangers kept replaying in my mind. The way they looked at me wasn't normal. It wasn't curiosity. It was shock. Almost like they had seen someone return from the dead. The next afternoon, I agreed to meet them at a small restaurant across town. Part of me wanted to cancel. The whole thing sounded impossible. But another part of me needed answers. When I arrived, the group was already waiting. The woman who had called me B stood up immediately. Her eyes filled with tears again. She introduced herself as Evelyn Calloway. The elderly man beside her was Harold Calloway. The others were relatives who had come hoping that what they believed was true. I sat down nervously. For a few moments, nobody spoke. Finally, Evelyn took a deep breath. 20 years ago, our granddaughter disappeared after a terrible highway accident, she said softly. I listened in silence. She explained that the missing child was named Beatrice Calloway. Her family always called her B. The moment I heard that nickname again, a strange feeling passed through me. I couldn't explain it. It felt distant, like a memory hidden behind a locked door. Harold pulled an old photograph from a folder and placed it on the table. It showed a smiling little girl. I stared at the picture. Something about it made my chest tighten. Evelyn continued speaking. She told me their family had spent 20 years searching for Beatrice. They hired investigators, followed leads, and never gave up hope that one day they would find her. Then she explained why she had reacted so strongly at my birthday party. "The moment I saw your eyes, I felt something," she said. "They are exactly like hers." I didn't know what to say. Then she mentioned a small birthmark near my shoulder. My heart skipped. Very few people knew about that birthmark. Evelyn described its exact shape without hesitation. Suddenly, the room felt smaller. I wanted to tell myself this was all a misunderstanding. I wanted to believe there had to be another explanation. But deep inside, something felt frighteningly familiar. The stories, the photographs, the nickname. None of it felt completely wrong. Evelyn reached across the table and gently held my hand. "We're not asking you to believe us today," she said. "We're only asking for one chance to prove the truth." The entire table waited for my answer. After several long seconds, I finally nodded. "Okay," I said quietly. And with that single word, my life began moving toward a truth I never expected to discover. A few days later, the DNA test was arranged. The Callaways handled everything and promised they would respect whatever the results showed. They seemed hopeful, but I was nervous. Part of me wanted answers. Another part was afraid of what those answers might be. While waiting for the results, I decided to look into my own past. If the Callaways were wrong, I wanted proof. If they were right, I needed to know. I started by searching through old family photo albums at my parents' house. At first, nothing seemed unusual. There were plenty of pictures of Dylan growing up, birthday parties, school events, family vacations. But when I looked for photos of myself before age 7, I found almost nothing. A few blurry pictures existed, but very few. It didn't make sense. Most parents keep hundreds of photos of their children. Why were so many of mine missing? The question stayed in my mind. A few days later, I called Patricia. I tried asking simple questions about my early childhood. Where had we lived before I started school? What was my first daycare? Who were our neighbors back then? Almost immediately, her voice changed. She became angry. She told me I was digging into things that didn't matter. When I asked again, she ended the conversation. That reaction only made me more suspicious. I began requesting copies of old records. The more documents I found, the stranger everything became. Some school records listed addresses that didn't exist. Other records had dates that didn't match. One medical file showed information that conflicted with another. Important details seemed incomplete or missing altogether. At first, I thought they were simple mistakes, but there were too many of them. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Then, my father started calling. At first, he sounded concerned. Soon, his concern turned into panic. He called several times a day. Every conversation ended the same way. "Stop talking to those people," he would say. "They're filling your head with nonsense." When I refused, he became even more desperate. His behavior didn't make sense. If the Callaways were simply mistaken, why was he so afraid? Why did both of my parents become angry whenever I asked questions? Each day brought more doubts. Each new document raised more concerns. The life I thought I understood was beginning to crack apart. For 27 years, I believed my parents simply favored Dylan more than me. That explanation had always hurt. But now, for the first time, I realized something much worse might be hiding underneath. Maybe this wasn't about favoritism at all. Maybe my parents had been hiding a secret my entire life. And the closer I got to the truth, the more terrified they seemed to become. 2 weeks felt like 2 years. Every morning, I woke up wondering if that day would finally bring answers. Every night, I lay awake thinking about everything I had discovered. The missing photographs, the strange records, my parents' panic. Nothing made sense anymore. Then the call finally came. The DNA results were ready. My hands shook as I drove to meet the Callaway family. The entire trip felt unreal. Part of me still hoped there was a simple explanation for everything. When I arrived, everyone was already waiting. Evelyn sat quietly beside Harold. Neither of them spoke much. The tension in the room was overwhelming. The specialist opened the file and carefully explained the results. Then came the words that changed my life forever. The DNA evidence confirmed that I was biologically related to the Callaway family. There was no mistake, no doubt, no misunderstanding. I was Beatrice Callaway. For several seconds, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The room felt completely silent. Then Evelyn broke down. She covered her face and began crying uncontrollably. Harold wrapped his arms around her as tears filled his own eyes. Other family members started crying too. After 20 years of searching, they had finally found the little girl they thought was gone forever. I should have felt happy. Part of me did. But happiness wasn't the only emotion inside me. I felt joy. I felt shock. I felt confusion. I felt anger. Everything crashed together at once. 27 years of my life suddenly looked different. My name, my family, my childhood, even my memories felt uncertain. Later that day, I drove straight to my parents' house. I needed answers. The moment Patricia opened the door, I held up the DNA report.
"We need to talk," I said.
My father appeared behind her. Neither of them looked surprised. That hurt more than anything. I asked them question after question.
Who was I really?
How long had they known? Why had they lied? But they refused to answer. They avoided every question. Then Patricia suddenly became angry. Instead of explaining herself, she pointed at me. "How could you do this to us?" she demanded. I stared at her in disbelief. "Do what?" I asked. "Betray your family," she shouted. Those words told me everything. Not because of what she said, because of what she didn't say. She never denied the DNA results. She never claimed the Callaways were wrong. She never acted surprised. In that moment, the truth became painfully clear. The people who raised me had known all along. For years, they had hidden something enormous. And now that the truth was finally out, they were more afraid of being exposed than losing me. The lie I had lived inside for 20 years was finally falling apart. After the DNA results confirmed that I was Beatrice Callaway, everyone wanted answers. The biggest question was simple. How had I ended up living as Brinley Rhodes for 20 years? Since Patricia and Warren refused to tell the truth, the Callaways hired a private investigator. His job was to uncover exactly what happened all those years ago. The investigation lasted several weeks. During that time, more records were collected, old reports were reviewed, and witnesses were contacted. Then the investigator finally presented his findings. The truth was worse than anything I had imagined. 20 years earlier, a terrible highway accident had separated me from my biological relatives. I had been a frightened little girl, injured and alone. Emergency responders were focused on the crash scene and the victims involved. In the confusion that followed, I somehow became separated from the family members who survived. Authorities immediately began searching for relatives and trying to identify everyone connected to the accident. At that point, I should have been reunited with my family. Instead, Patricia found me first. According to the investigator, she discovered me alone and confused shortly after the accident. She knew I wasn't her child. She knew authorities were searching for family members. Yet she never reported finding me. Warren learned the truth soon afterward. Instead of contacting officials, they made a decision that changed all of our lives. They kept me. As the investigation continued, even more disturbing information appeared. Old paperwork contained false statements. Several documents appeared to have been altered. Records that should have connected me to the Callaway family had disappeared. The investigator believed forged paperwork had helped support the lie for years. Meanwhile, the Callaways had never stopped searching. They hired investigators. They followed leads across different states. Every possible clue was investigated. Every rumor was checked. For 2 decades, they believed I was missing. The heartbreaking reality was that I had been alive the entire time. I had simply been living under a different name. When the investigator finished speaking, nobody in the room could believe it. Evelyn cried quietly. Harold stared at the documents in silence. Even I struggled to process everything. The people I had trusted my whole life had hidden the truth from me. Not for months. Not for years. For decades. The story soon shocked everyone involved in the case. But as devastating as the discovery was, the investigator wasn't finished. There were still financial records being examined. There were still unanswered questions. And according to him, evidence suggested that Patricia and Warren had another reason for keeping me. A reason far darker than anyone had expected. The truth we had uncovered was terrible. But something even worse was still waiting to be revealed. After the investigator revealed how I had been taken from my biological family, I thought I had already learned the worst possible truth. I was wrong. A second investigation was now focused on understanding why Patricia and Warren had kept me for so many years. At first, the answers seemed heartbreaking. Old medical records showed that Patricia had suffered several miscarriages before the accident happened. According to people who knew her at the time, she had been devastated. She wanted a child more than anything. The losses had left deep emotional scars that never fully healed. When she found me alone after the accident, she saw something she believed was a miracle. A chance to have the daughter she had always wanted. The investigator believed that Patricia convinced herself she was saving me. Then days became weeks. Weeks became months. Months became years. The lie continued growing until it became too large to admit. By the time I was old enough to ask questions, telling the truth would have destroyed everything she had built. As painful as that explanation was, it wasn't the entire story. The investigation soon uncovered something far worse. Something connected to Warren. One afternoon, the Callaways' legal team gathered everyone together to discuss new findings. The moment I entered the room, I could tell something serious had happened. Several financial experts were present. Large folders sat on the conference table. The lead attorney opened one of them. Then he explained that my biological parents had established a trust fund for me before their deaths. The money was intended to support my future, my education, my medical needs, my life. I sat frozen as he continued speaking. Evidence showed that Warren had somehow gained access to portions of those funds over the years. Bank records revealed transfers connected to accounts under his control. The money had not been used for me. Instead, investigators believed it had helped support the Rhodes family's lifestyle. Mortgage payments, vacations, household expenses, other purchases. Each new document felt like another punch to the stomach. I remembered birthdays where I received little attention. I remembered being told money was tight whenever I needed something. Now I was learning that money intended for my future had been quietly disappearing for years. The room felt silent as the reality settled over me. I hadn't simply been taken from my family. I hadn't simply been raised under a false identity. I had also been used. The people who claimed to love me had benefited from something that was never theirs. The betrayal became larger and darker than I ever imagined. As the investigation continued, legal experts began preparing for what would come next. And for the first time, it seemed possible that Patricia and Warren might finally be forced to answer for everything they had done. Once the financial evidence was uncovered, everything began moving very quickly. The Callaway family hired experienced lawyers to protect my rights and recover what had been taken from me. They were no longer searching for answers. Now they were fighting for justice. Legal action was officially launched against Warren and Patricia. Almost immediately, financial investigators started examining years of records. The deeper they looked, the more problems they found. Bank statements revealed transactions that had never been properly explained. Money had moved through multiple accounts over many years. Some transfers appeared carefully hidden. Others were disguised as routine financial activity. Investigators continued following the trail. Soon, they discovered documents containing signatures that experts believed had been forged. Trust account records were reviewed line by line. Auditors examined every payment and withdrawal connected to my biological family's assets. Each week seemed to bring another troubling discovery. Meanwhile, Warren and Patricia desperately tried to defend themselves. Their lawyers denied wrongdoing. They claimed everything had been a misunderstanding. But the growing pile of evidence made those explanations harder to believe. For the first time in my life, I saw fear in both of them. The confident image they had always presented to the world was beginning to crack. Dylan stood firmly beside them at first. He insisted our parents would never do something so terrible. He accused me of turning against the family. Every interview, every court filing, and every news report only made him angrier. But then the evidence became impossible to ignore. He attended several legal meetings and reviewed some of the records himself. The documents spoke for themselves. The dates matched. The transfers matched. The signatures raised serious questions. Slowly, his certainty disappeared. For the first time, he started asking questions instead of making excuses. Watching that change was strange. Dylan had spent his entire life defending our parents. Now, even he seemed unsure about what to believe. Outside the family, the damage continued spreading. People who had once called Warren and Patricia close friends began keeping their distance. Some stopped returning phone calls. Others publicly expressed concern about the accusations. Business partners grew nervous. Several partnerships ended. Important clients quietly walked away. The respected reputation Warren had spent decades building began falling apart. News of the investigation spread throughout the community. People who once admired the Rhodes family now questioned everything. I watched it all from a distance. Part of me felt sad. No one enjoys seeing lives collapse. But another part of me knew this was the result of choices made long ago. For years, lies had been protected by silence. Now those lies were finally being exposed. And for the first time, the people responsible were beginning to face the consequences of what they had done. Dylan couldn't accept what was happening. Even after seeing the documents, even after hearing the investigators, he still refused to believe that our parents had done anything wrong. Instead of facing the truth, he turned all his anger toward me. He said I was the reason everything was falling apart. According to him, I had ruined the family. I stood there in silence for a moment, trying to understand how he could still think like that after everything. Then something inside me finally broke. I had spent my whole life staying quiet, letting people speak over me, letting them decide my value, letting them ignore my pain.
But not anymore.
I looked at Dylan and told him he was wrong. My voice was calm at first, but the words came faster as years of hurt finally came out. I told him about every moment I had been treated like I didn't matter. Every birthday where I was ignored. Every holiday where I was left out. Every time I was compared to him and made to feel smaller. Every insult I was forced to swallow just to keep peace in the house. I told him how I learned to sit quietly, because speaking up only made things worse for me. My voice shook, but I didn't stop. For the first time, I didn't hold anything back. Dylan listened, but he had no answer. No joke. No insult. No defense. Just silence. That silence told me everything I needed to know. He had never really seen me as equal. He had only seen what our parents taught him to see. After everything I said, he looked different. Not angry anymore. Just lost. But I knew something had changed forever between us. This wasn't just an argument. It was the end of something that could never be repaired. I walked away without waiting for him to respond. Behind me, I heard nothing. No apology. No call for me to stop. Just emptiness. At the same time, things were getting worse for our parents. Prosecutors were now fully involved in the case. They were collecting evidence, interviewing witnesses, and preparing formal charges connected to the forged documents and stolen trust funds. Every new discovery made the case stronger. Every report made their situation more serious. The legal system was no longer just investigating. It was preparing to act. And as all of this unfolded, one truth became clearer than ever. The family I had once believed in was not just broken. It was collapsing completely, and there was no way left to hold it together. The court hearings changed everything. Day by day, more truth came out in front of everyone. Lawyers showed records, old files, and financial reports that proved how deeply the deception had gone. People in the courtroom listened in shock as the full story was revealed. A missing child had not only been found, but had been hidden for more than 20 years. The case became public news. Reporters gathered outside the courthouse. The name of the Rhodes family was everywhere. Warren tried to defend himself at first, but it was no use. The evidence was too strong. Bank records, forged documents, and witness statements all pointed to the same truth. He eventually lost control of his business. Clients left. Partners pulled away. Contracts were canceled. Everything he built slowly collapsed. Patricia's situation became even worse. She faced criminal charges for her role in hiding me and helping maintain the false identity. She tried to explain herself, but the court did not accept emotional excuses over clear evidence. Financial judgments were also placed on both Warren and Patricia. They were ordered to repay large amounts of money connected to stolen trust funds and misused assets. For the first time, they were being held fully responsible for what they had done. Meanwhile, the Calloway family worked with lawyers to restore everything that belonged to me. Accounts were corrected. Legal ownership was transferred back. My biological inheritance, which had been hidden and misused for years, was finally under my control again. But even with all of that happening, something inside me felt different. I expected revenge to feel like anger or satisfaction. But it didn't. The most powerful feeling came from something else. It came from seeing the people who once controlled my entire life lose their power. For years, I had been made to feel small, unimportant, unwanted. I had been ignored in my own home and treated like I didn't matter. Now, everything had changed. Warren could no longer control the situation. Patricia could no longer silence me. Even Dylan could no longer blame me for everything. They were all forced to face the truth they had avoided for so long. And for the first time, I was no longer standing in their shadow. I was standing on my own. The revenge I once thought I wanted didn't feel necessary anymore, because watching the truth come out was enough. And for the first time in my life, I felt something I had never truly felt before. Freedom. 1 year later, my life looked nothing like it used to. Everything had changed in ways I never thought possible. I was no longer living in confusion or silence. I was rebuilding my life with the Calloway family, the people who had been searching for me for so many years. At first, it felt strange being part of their world. There were so many things I didn't know. So many stories I had never heard. But they never treated me like an outsider. They were patient with me. They helped me learn who I really was. Slowly, I started understanding the life I had lost. I learned about my biological parents, the kind of people they were, and the love they had for me before everything was taken away. Every story felt like I was filling in missing pieces of myself. Little by little, I began to feel whole again. I also learned family traditions I had never experienced before. Simple things like how they celebrated holidays, how they gathered for dinners, and how they supported each other during difficult times. It felt warm in a way I had never known. For the first time, I understood what it meant to be part of a family that truly cared. Then my 28th birthday arrived. The Calloways planned a celebration for me. But this time, everything was different. There was no tension in the room. No hidden anger. No judgment in their eyes. When I walked in, people smiled at me. They welcomed me without hesitation. Nobody made me feel small. Nobody ignored me. Nobody treated me like I didn't belong. For a moment, I just stood there, taking it all in. I looked around the room and saw faces filled with warmth instead of coldness. Laughter instead of silence. Love instead of rejection. Something inside me shifted. I finally understood something important. The birthday party that once destroyed my life had actually changed it forever. That night years ago, when my parents threw me out, I thought my world had ended. But it was actually the moment everything began. Because that was the night my real family finally found me again. The night the truth started to come out. And as I stood there on my 28th birthday, surrounded by people who truly loved me, I realized something I had never believed before. I belonged. And this time it was real. No one could take that away from me again.